All right, so today I want to talk about Sam Seder and the majority report in general because I've been kind of disappointed with the way that they've been covering some of the people who have been speaking out against Israel. And they are also doing uh, their part in promoting Zionist canards, namely in collectivizing Jews as innocent and as victims. Both of these things are wrong. Both of these things need to stop. Okay. And it annoys me how Sam Seder criticizes Jimmy Dore and Candace Owens, but he won't criticize David Pakman for his Jewish supremacy. That pisses me off, the double standards. But let's get into this video here so we can analyze it a little bit more thoroughly.
Talking about how, Israel's a problem, but also sort of Jews.
Well, actually, that is true because there are Jewish people who are criminals. Like, is he collectivizing Jews as innocent and as victims? Because that's a Jewish supremacist canard. Okay, there are Jews who are criminals. If you look at the genocide going on in Gaza, the ones who are committing that genocide are Jews. Okay, being Jewish doesn't make you above reproach, and it's wrong to collectivize Jews as innocent and as victims. So there are some people who are countering this narrative with evidence to the contrary that contradicts the narrative that Jews are always perpetually victims or innocent. And that's what Candace Owens is doing.
In their crap. I'm America first. I won't apologize for it. I'm Christianity first. I won't apologize for it. And that upsets some people because I guess, how dare she have the audacity? Well, guess what? I have the audacity, folks.
So you're saying that there was a greater Holocaust of Christians that happened, and it was committed by the Bolsheviks, and the leader of them at the time was a Jewish guy.
Well, Henry Kagoda, what really ran the Gulag camp system. So people should read, if you're interested, Alexander Solzhenitsyn talking about how shocking it was to watch the American president linking arms with Stalin, talking about we're putting an end to the Holocaust in World War II. And Stalin was still mass killing Christians in Russia. I mean, it's an absolute nonsense. And you got to take it back all the way. The Bolshevik Revolution happened. They assassinated the Tsar, I think, in 1880. And then by the time they actually properly took over, I think it was around 1910. And so what was going on in Russia at that time was they immediately took over. They started a gulag system, concentration camps, where they were mass drowning Christians in barges. And this information is readily available, and yet you never learn about it. People don't want to talk about it. It makes them very uncomfortable.
Well, I didn't hear about it until I heard you talk about it.
Yeah, Henry Kagoda, look him up. It's stunning. I mean, he must have killed alone 15 million people.
Okay, let me just fact check that real quick. Here we have him. And sure enough, it's saying right here, he's Jewish. So he supervised arrests, show trials, executions, climactic events of the Great Purge. So penal labor from the Gulag system, in which thousands of laborers died. Okay, I mean, there might be some inconsistency with some of the things she said earlier about the dates, but in terms of this guy, I'm not seeing anything wrong there.
And this is a person that's not even spoken about. And so that's the reason why Piers just goes, okay, yeah, no, okay, let's move on to the next point. So in my viewpoint, the Israeli government has way too much involvement with the American government, and part of that, this program, and you saw this after October 7th, Congress immediately passed that there would be we would be learning about October 7th in schools.
Hold on for 1 second. Listen.
Well, first of all, I agree with what she's about to say, which Sam Seder's cutting her off on. She's about to talk about how they want us to learn about October 7th. No, we should not be doing that. So I agree with Candace Owens here.
The thing that you have to be careful of here is that there are some complaints that they have about what's going on with our government in terms of Israel that are legitimate, but they are undergirded by a different complaint, and that is that Jews now are responsible for the mass killing of Christians because there was a Jew who was a Bolshevik.
Okay, so I just fact checked it right now, and there was. So what he's doing is he's trying to say that this man's Jewish identity is not relevant to his actions. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it's also rather irrelevant because what people like Sam Seder and other liberals do is that they collectivize Jews as innocent and as victims, irrespective of whether or not their Jewish identity is relevant to them being victims. So, in other words, whenever Jews are victims, he and other liberals attach their Jewish identity to it. But when Jews are criminals and kill people, then all of a sudden their Jewish identity is irrelevant. You see, that's a double standard. Why is it that when Jews are victims, their Jewish identity is important, but when Jews are criminals and rape and murder or are responsible for mass murder, then all of a sudden their Jewish identity is irrelevant? How do you make that determination? And why are you invoking this double standard? Because what this actually does is it induces a bias in people's minds that Jews are always victims and they're always innocent. This is wrong. It's wrong to collectivize anyone as anything, whether it's Jews or anyone else. It's wrong to collectivize Jews as innocent and as victims.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll notice Candace Owens went on maternity leave late last year after criticizing Israel a little bit and having the spat with Ben Shapiro. She came back and stopped talking about Israel and started talking about how communist Jewish or Marxist Jews were the real threat here, and has been on this crisis king bit ever since. So she's
No, what she was doing was she was pointing out instances where Jews were not oppressed, where Jews were not innocent, where they were criminals and were responsible for crimes. And I think that is legitimate to point out in order to counter the narrative that Jews are perpetually innocent.
found a way to pivot away from directly alienating the sort of pro-Israel parts of our audience and just stoking the anti-Semitism.
Well, that's
Okay, and they use this stupid word anti-Semitism so much. That word was coined by a well-known racist named Maurice Steinschneider. Okay, white Jews, including the white Jews, the Bolsheviks, whatever, Ashkenazis are not Semitic people. Okay, they are not Semitic people. Here we have Eliezer ben Yehuda. Okay, this guy revived the Hebrew language. Okay, before this guy, and he's a Zionist, before this guy who lived between 1858 and 1922, before him, no one spoke Hebrew. Hebrew was a dead language, similar to Sanskrit, similar to Latin, similar to Parley, in that Hebrew was a language that was only spoken in religious ceremonies, prayers and things like that. It's similar to how Parley is only spoken in Buddhism during certain ceremonies, prayers, and things like that, chanting. Parley was the language of Siddhartha Gautama, which is the Buddha, but Buddhists don't speak Parley today. In Sri Lanka, they don't speak Parley. They speak their native language, usually Sinhalese if it's Sri Lankan Buddhists. And back then, similarly, they didn't speak Hebrew back then. They spoke Yiddish. That is what Ashkenazi spoke. Or if they were Russian, they would speak Russian. So that's what I'm trying to say. Like, they keep on repeating this nonsense. So what I'm trying to say is white Jews are not Semitic people. Okay, Hebrew is a Semitic language, but white Jews are not Semitic people. So, and they keep on repeating this stupid misnomer of anti-Semitism all the time. And the reason why this word was coined was to equivocate Ashkenazis with Jews and with Semitic people, implying that they are originally from the Middle East when they weren't, and they never were.
It's also, yeah, you'll often hear that refrain when anti-Semites are speaking about that kind of stuff in coded language, and like, I mean, I don't know, the fact it also is a giveaway where she talks about how Israel has too much involvement in our politics, but doesn't talk too much about the slaughter in and of itself, and then all of the faux history that she's engaging in there informs that as well, where she's trying to basically say the Jews are controlling everything and that's the real problem, as opposed to...
No, actually, Jews being in positions of power and influence in America actually is a very big problem. Okay, now if you want to be more specific, you can call them Zionist Jews, but I don't know of a single one example of an anti-Zionist Jew in a position of power and influence in America. And no, Bernie Sanders is not one of them. Bernie Sanders is a Zionist. He is on the left side of the Zionism spectrum, and that's another thing you need to keep in mind, is that Zionism is not a monolith, it's a spectrum. But yeah, even he's a Zionist. They all are. So you had Steven Spielberg, who got Melissa Barrera, the Mexican-American actress who was in Scream, fired from the Scream sequel because she dared say pro-Palestinian things and criticize Zionism and criticize Jewish Zionist influence in Hollywood. And then they proved her to be correct by firing her. You know, Steven Spielberg and other Jewish Zionists in Hollywood got her fired. That's what Jewish Zionists do. They are loyal to a foreign government, and they are willing to hurt fellow Americans in order to benefit the best interest of that country. And that's wrong.
the foreign policy critique, or the critique of the genocide or the settlements or all of that.
She has actually criticized that stuff before. Okay, and guess what? The people who are responsible for those settlements and the genocide and all the rest, those people are Jews. Okay, so when you collectivize Jews as innocent or as victims, then that implies that the people who are committing genocide, who are Jews, you're implying that those people are victims and innocent too, and they're obviously not. So countering this narrative of collectivizing Jews as innocent as victims is actually important. It's worthwhile. And while it may not be tasteful to you, genocide is decidedly more untasteful.
Colonialism. She can't engage in that at all, because then that's anathema to her politics.
We should say too that, like, the history of...
Okay, so I posted some stuff here, but then I'm going to get into some of the comments I made. So we're going to approach on one of the things.
Of Jews in relationship to the Bolsheviks are much more complicated than she lays out. Initially, I think the Jewish population in Russia was not fully on board, and then the anti-Bolshevik forces became pretty anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just like...
Okay, so listen to what he said. So he said that the anti-Bolshevik forces became pretty anti-Semitic, which is a misnomer. He should be saying anti-Jewish, but I say, I'm confused. Isn't that consistent with what she just said? She's saying that the Bolsheviks were Jews, and so you're saying that the anti-Bolsheviks being anti-Semitic, a misnomer, by the way, white Jews weren't Semitic people, would be consistent with what she's saying. So what he doesn't seem to understand is that when the oppressive criminal element are Jews, then the reaction to that would be anti-Jewish. So it's consistent with what she's saying. I will actually take it a step further, and I will point out that the Secretary of State of the Confederacy was Jewish. And this contradicts once again, the narrative that Jews were perpetually oppressed. How can Jews be perpetually oppressed if Jews were in positions of power and influence in America during a time when black people were slaves? And I'm not even getting into the fact that there's a person who was in a position of inherent evil, Secretary of State of the Confederacy. He wasn't the only Jew in a position of power and influence at the time. There was also David Levy Yulee. As you can see here, he was Jewish. Oops. And again, he wasn't the only one. There was also Louis Charles Levin. It says here, Levin was the second person of Jewish descent elected to the United States Congress after David Levy Yulee. And this person, he led anti-Catholic riots that led to the killing of over 20 Irish Americans, burning many of their homes, and the destruction of 3 churches associated with their community. So the purpose of pointing out instances of where Jews were in positions of power and influence, and also positions of where they were actually criminals and responsible for mass murder, is not simply to say that all Jews are criminals. It's to counter the narrative that Jews were perpetually oppressed, and to counter the narrative that Jews were always innocent. Clearly, they weren't. That's the point. Okay, these are prejudices that liberals possess that need to be disabused. Okay, it is very important to disabuse yourself of these prejudices, and these are prejudices, to assume that Jews were perpetually oppressed, or that they were always victims, or they were always innocent. Okay, these are wrong assumptions to make, because then it colors your view on Jews who do wrong in the present time, the Jews who rape and murder kids and commit genocide. There's value in countering that narrative, and while it may be uncomfortable for you to contend with that, it is necessary because it is correct. It's wrong to collectivize any group as anything, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
It's like straight up Nazi propaganda. This is what Nazis would have said, like, hey, don't look at the Holocaust we did, because actually what we were saying was this.
No. It's really not Nazi propaganda. It really isn't. It's being honest about history and about who was responsible for certain crimes, because they never actually dispute the fact that this guy was responsible for mass killings. They never dispute that. They always just do whataboutisms.
This is the threat of these Jewish communists that we actually had to react against.
Oh yeah,
But let's hear how Jimmy Dore pushes back on this. He's definitely done his homework for this.
Immediately passed that there would be we would be learning about October 7th in schools as if it was like Pearl Harbor, right? A day that will live in infamy. Why? This is not my country. That's a nonsense. And if the answer is, oh, because it's a day that should live in infamy, why just Israel? Why just Israel?
Right.
Why not also what's happening in Armenia or happening in Nigeria or happening all over the world? Why not a day that will live in infamy? Russia actually just went through a terror attack, and Russia has a lot of Christians. I'm Christian. So if we can just start drafting over days of terror that happen on the basis of our religion.
Okay, so what she said there is she's going back to her previous point where she was talking about how we should not be learning about October 7th as if this is some great tragedy committed against Americans, because it wasn't. This is something that happened in a foreign country. I'm not going to get into all the details about that, but the point she's making is that this is not something that Americans should be learning in schools just because it happened to Jews. And I agree with her. Okay, and then she's giving examples. Why not learn about certain tragedies that happened in other countries as well? Okay, we're Americans. Okay, we should be learning about world history, but that needs to be confined to a world history class, and we shouldn't be giving preference to Jews just because Jews think they're God's chosen people, or because Sam Seder collectivizes Jews as victims and as innocent, which is wrong. These are wrong things to do.
The thing is that she's doing exactly what Netanyahu does, but she's just doing it from the other side. She uses Israel and Christian interests as if they are the same thing, just on opposite sides of the coin, and she doesn't like one over the other, as opposed to, so she's just basically saying Israel is Jews, Jews are Israel.
Well, they do describe themselves as a Jewish state, Sam. I hate to break it to you. It's not. It's actually an Ashkenazi supremacist state. But he never gives her credit for the point that she raised there, which is we shouldn't be learning about October 7th in like history class in public schools and things like that. I agree with her there. Instead, he tries to frame what she's saying as a demagoguery kind of thing. And the reason why she might be doing that is because she's speaking to a conservative audience. Okay, but she's still arriving at the same conclusion that liberals actually would want us to arrive at, which is we shouldn't be advancing pro-Israel agendas in the American public school system, because that is learning about October 7th and stuff like that. That is advancing a Israeli agenda. And yeah, there are a lot of Jews that live in Israel. I mean, it describes it as a Jewish state. It's wrong, but it describes it as such. And you can't criticize Israel without also criticizing Jewish identity politics. You have to, because that's what they leverage in order to protect themselves. And Jewish supremacy is a legitimate target of criticism. But Sam Seder never criticizes Jewish supremacy. They always engage Israel as a secular nation, which it obviously isn't. It is a Jewish supremacist, or I should say Ashkenazi supremacist nation.
Which is exactly what Netanyahu does. And that's what people who are Jewish and against what's happening in Gaza, in this country, a significant portion of them, anywhere from last polls, over 50% wanted to condition aid to Israel. Somewhere around 40 some odd percent felt like Israel was doing was genocide.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the vast majority of Jews are Zionists. So I don't know what he's saying is true or not. He doesn't cite his sources. He's just asserting certain polls, whatever. However, it's largely irrelevant because the vast majority of Jews in America are still Zionists in some way, shape, or form. I touched upon this in my previous video talking about David Pakman. Michael Brooks was a Zionist. He was a very left-leaning Zionist, but he was still a Zionist. He was a Zionist that was opposed to genocide and opposed to racism, but he was still a Zionist. So it's a lot more than what he's suggesting, what Sam Seder is suggesting here. And the vast majority of Israelis actually, and these are Jews, they actually do support the genocide of Gaza, and they actually think that their government isn't doing enough to kill Palestinians in Gaza. These are Jews who believe this. Okay, so you need to be honest about Jewish supremacy, and I'm going to be a little bit honest about Jewish supremacy here. Let's take a look at what some Jewish supremacists have said. One Jew equals 1,027 Palestinians. So here is a Jewish supremacist saying that one Jewish life is worth over 1,000 Palestinians, and they should kill so many Palestinians. This is what a Jew is saying. This guy's a Jew. It's just a fact. Let's listen to what this Jew says.
You don't believe in God,
Yeah, I don't believe in God.
but you're God's chosen people?
Yeah, I'm Jewish.
Okay, let's try that one more time. You don't believe in God.
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe there's nothing but death.
Okay, so you don't believe in God. But
Yeah.
you believe that you're God's chosen people.
Yeah,
Okay. So these are Jews who believe that Jewish life is worth thousands of Palestinian lives, and then you have another Jew who's actually an atheist that believes that Jews are God's chosen people. As illogical as that is. Okay, these are Jewish supremacists. Okay, and Sam Seder never criticizes scum like this, and there's plenty of scum like this to go around. And this is the reason why you need to criticize Jewish identity politics. You need to criticize Jewish supremacy. You need to criticize Jewish identity. It's wrong. It's wrong because it feeds into this kind of garbage. There's plenty in Judaism that feeds into this garbage. The idea that Jews are God's chosen people. Fuck that shit. Are you kidding me?
Of the Jewish population in this country. And she is conflating these things. So
Actually, she's not. Like, I hate to keep stopping this, but she's actually not. She's criticizing an element of what's going on. Because you have to criticize Jewish identity. You have to criticize the collectivization of Jews as innocent and as victims. And that's the reason why I need to criticize Sam Seder, which I normally do agree with a lot of the stuff that he says. But when it comes to Jews, he just goes right into the same kind of canards that Zionism has been spreading. And that Zionists leverage the canards that he's saying, which is the collectivization of Jews as innocent and as victims. He's actually using liberals. Zionists are using liberals like him and non-Jewish liberals to benefit themselves. They're using their collectivization of Jews as innocent and as victims to attack their critics. Because Candace Owens is one of the critics of Zionism, of Zionists.
you know, that is the tip-off there, that what she's talking about is not a complaint with Israel.
Yeah, I mean, Candace, like, why don't we talk about your complicity in this?
Yeah, because it shouldn't only be a criticism of Israel. It needs to be a criticism of people as well. And the ideologies, the hateful ideologies of people, which can include Jewish identity politics and Jewish supremacy.
Spanish Inquisition. I mean, I don't know if we're talking about how this is all about, like, Jews versus Christians as opposed to the conversation around Israel being about empire and power and colonialism. Then, like, does she want a history lesson on the Spanish Inquisition?
Well, she can't raise the issue of colonialism. That's not allowed in her.
Okay, so I countered this point. So I said here, because Christians aren't collectivized as innocent and as victims, but Jews are, and that's wrong. She's merely pointing out historical facts where Jews were neither innocent nor victims, and were actually criminals and committed mass murder. This counters the narrative that Jews were perpetually oppressed and were always victims and never criminals. That's the reason why it's irrelevant to bring up the Spanish Inquisition, because Christians aren't collectivized as innocent, nor as victims. I mean, sometimes, yeah, I have heard Christians try to infantilize themselves, but liberals don't do that to them. But what liberals do is they infantilize Jews, and that needs to stop. And then I follow up with this. No. The conversation about Israel is much more than just colonialism and power. It's about Jewish supremacy and about how Jews leverage Jewish identity to protect themselves from critique. How they use liberals that collectivize Jews as innocent and as victims, as you are, to protect themselves. That's the problem.
Her lexicon.
I also say, like, I don't think Stalin needed, like, sort of Jewish people beneath him to do negative things and like mass killings and incarcerations.
Let's play just a little bit more, and then I will talk about.
Russia actually just went through a terror attack, and Russia has a lot of Christians. I'm Christian. So if we can just start drafting over days of terror that happen on the basis of our religion, I'd like to draft what just happened in Russia. I want my kids to learn about that in school.
Go ahead, Kurt.
Hey, so you said the thing about concentration camps. I thought the Cecil Rhodes, Boer War concentration camps came first. Am I wrong about that?
Pardon, could you say the last tidbit?
Okay, so the rest, they kind of go off target here and kind of talk about other things. But to close, I do want to critique Sam Seder for not criticizing David Pakman. So I brought this up earlier, and how Sam Seder in the Majority Report, they have no problem criticizing Jimmy Dore, who, by the way, like, he didn't do anything wrong here. Okay, he didn't push back on some of the inaccuracies that Candace Owens made. Maybe she made a few inaccuracies here and there because he's learning from her. Okay, he's not super familiar with the subject matter. So he has a guest on his program who's going to talk about something that he isn't well educated on. There's nothing wrong with that. Sam Seder does that all the time, where he has guests on that teach something. Okay, so the critique against Jimmy Dore was completely unfair, in my opinion. And look, I have no problem criticizing Jimmy Dore. I have in the past, and I have criticized Candace Owens tremendously in the past as well for some of the awful takes that she has had before October 7th and stuff like that. Like, I actually hated Candace Owens. I know that's shocking, but I don't disagree with anything that she said here. Same thing with Jimmy Dore. But what Sam Seder does not do is he never criticizes David Pakman for all the vile, horrendous Jewish supremacist shit that this motherfucker says. Because he has said far worse. Far worse. This guy actually is defending Jews who rape and murder children and commit genocide. That is what he's doing, just because they're Jews. And Sam Seder never criticizes that. In fact, I've seen very few people criticize David Pakman. This guy did, Jonah, and there was one other guy I saw. And these are liberals. But that's about it. Other than me and these guys, I haven't seen anyone else. Why hasn't TYT done this? I mean, they have a Jew supremacist in their employment. But why hasn't Sam Seder criticized David Pakman? Yeah, that's wrong. Because what David Pakman has said is a million times worse than anything Candace Owens has said about Jews. Give me a break. So I'm going to criticize Sam Seder just like I criticize anyone else, because if I see something that liberals are doing wrong, I have to point it out, because otherwise there's never going to be any corrective action to it. Because right now, what they're doing is actually helping a Zionist narrative. What Zionists have done was they've gotten conservatives to call liberals anti-Semitic for criticizing Israel, but they've also gotten liberals to call conservatives anti-Semitic for criticizing Jews in power and influence. You know? And pointing out when Jews have committed horrendous crimes. They've gotten both of us to call each other anti-Semitic. And that serves the Zionists. They benefit from this, not us. They're playing both sides against each other to weaken Americans so that we hate each other instead of hating Jewish Zionists, who are the real problem. That's it. See ya.